Welcome back to the shadows, my friends. This is Mr. Shadow's Stories, where the darkness speaks and the truth is far more terrifying than fiction. In the dead of night, when most people are safely tucked in their beds, some walk the empty corridors of our world. Janitors, night shift workers, the ones who see what happens when the lights go out and everyone else goes home. Tonight, I'm bringing you 5 true stories from janitors who experienced things that will make you question every shadow, every sound, and every moment you've ever spent alone after dark. So lock your doors, turn off the lights, and let me take you into the world of those brave enough to work when the rest of us refuse to. Let's begin. Story 1: The Locked Classroom. Our first story comes from Marcus, a janitor who worked at an elementary school in Pennsylvania for over 15 years. Marcus had always been comfortable with the night shift, the quiet hallways, the rhythmic sound of his mop hitting the floor, the solitude. It was peaceful, or so he thought. It was a Tuesday night in late October when everything changed. Marcus had his usual routine down to a science: start on the 3rd floor, work his way down, and finish in the gymnasium. That night, he was on the 2nd floor, mopping the hallway near the 3rd grade classrooms. The building was silent, except for the hum of the heating system and his own footsteps. As he passed room 2B, he heard something that made him freeze. It was the sound of a child giggling. Not just any giggle, the high-pitched, innocent laugh of a young girl. Marcus stood there, his mop dripping water onto the floor, his heart beginning to race. He checked his watch. It was 1:47 a.m. There shouldn't be anyone in this building but him. He approached the door slowly. The window on the door was dark, but he could hear it clearly now. Not just giggling, but whispering. Multiple voices, children's voices, speaking in hushed tones as if they were sharing secrets during class. Marcus's skin crawled, but he was a practical man. He told himself there had to be an explanation. Maybe some kids had snuck in. Maybe someone left a radio on. He reached for the doorknob. It was locked. The voices continued, completely unaware of his presence. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of desks scraping across the floor, moving as if students were rearranging their seats. He pressed his face against the window, cupping his eyes around his eyes to see inside. The classroom was completely empty. No children, no movement, but the sounds continued, growing louder. The giggling turned to laughter, the whispers into excited chatter. It was as if an entire class of invisible children was having the time of their lives in that dark, empty room. Marcus stumbled backwards, his rational mind trying to make sense of what he was experiencing. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. The voices stopped, the scraping stopped. The classroom fell into a suffocating quiet that was somehow worse than the sounds. He stood there in the hallway, his breathing heavy, waiting for something, anything. That's when he heard it, a small voice, clear as day, coming directly behind the door. A little girl's voice. She said, "Why won't you play with us, Mr. Marcus?" She knew his name. Marcus didn't remember running, but he found himself in his supervisor's office, his hands shaking as he dialed the police. They came, they checked the classroom, they found nothing. No signs of break-in, no children, no explanation. The room was locked from the outside, just as it should be. Marcus requested a transfer to a different building the very next day. He never worked another night shift again. But here's the thing that haunts him most. When the principal opened room 2B the next morning to investigate, she found all the desks rearranged in a circle, as if the children had been sitting in a group. Marcus was the last person in that building, and he never went inside that room. Story 2: The Basement Visitor. Sarah had been working as a janitor at a downtown office building in Chicago for 3 years when she encountered something that would change her forever. The building was a 30-story tower built in the 1960s with a parking garage and maintenance area in the basement levels. Sarah's job was simple: clean the offices on floors 15 through 22, then head down to the basement to dispose of trash and gather supplies for the next night. She had always felt uncomfortable in the basement. It was poorly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly. The ceilings were low, the hallways narrow, and there was always this smell, a mix of mildew, old concrete, and something else she could never quite place, but it was part of the job, so she dealt with it. One night in March, Sarah finished her rounds earlier than usual. It was just past midnight when she took the service elevator down to basement level 2. The doors opened with a metallic groan, and she stepped out into the familiar dimly lit corridor. She pulled her cart behind her, heading toward the storage room where she needed to restock her cleaning supplies. As she walked, she heard footsteps behind her. Not her footsteps. These were heavier, slower, deliberate. She stopped. The footsteps stopped. She turned around. The hallway was empty, stretching back toward the elevator in a straight line. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. No response. She continued walking, faster now, her instincts telling her something wasn't right. The footsteps resumed, matching her pace. This time she didn't stop, she didn't look back, she just walked faster, her heart pounding in her chest. The storage room was just ahead, maybe 50 feet away. Then she heard the breathing, heavy, labored breaths, like someone who had been running. It was coming from right behind her, so close she could feel warmth on the back of her neck. Sarah broke into a run, abandoning her cart, her keys jingling in her pocket as she sprinted toward the storage room. She reached the door, fumbled with her keys, and finally got it open. She slammed it behind her and pressed her back against the door, gasping for air. The single bulb in the storage room provided barely enough light to see, but she was safe. She pulled out her phone to call security. That's when she heard it. A slow, deliberate knock on the door. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. "Who's there?" Sarah demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. Silence. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice. It was deep, distorted, and almost mechanical. It said, "Let me in, Sarah. I just want to help you with your work." She never told her name. She wore no name tag. Her name wasn't written on her uniform, but whatever was on the other side of that door knew who she was. The knocking continued, growing more insistent. The door rattled in its frame. Sarah called security, screaming into the phone for help. The guard on duty arrived 7 minutes later, 7 minutes that felt like hours. When the knocking continued, growing more insistent. The door rattled in its frame. Sarah called security, screaming into the phone for help. The guard on duty arrived 7 minutes later, 7 minutes that felt like hours. When he opened the door from the outside, Sarah burst out, hysterical. The guard searched the entire basement level. He found nothing. No one. No explanation. But he did find something disturbing: wet footprints on the concrete floor, leading from the elevator to the storage room door. They weren't Sarah's. They were large, barefoot prints, and they simply ended at the door, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. Sarah quit the next day. She never went back to that building, but sometimes, late at night, she still hears that voice in her head. "Let me in, Sarah. I just want to help you with your work." And she wonders what would have happened if she had opened that door.
Story 3: The Hospital Hallway. David worked as a night janitor at a large hospital in Texas. Hospitals are never truly quiet, even at night. There's always the beeping of machines, the hushed conversations of nurses, and the occasional emergency. But the fourth floor, the old psychiatric ward that had been closed for 15 years, was different. It was silent, dead silent. David's job required him to clean the fourth floor once a week. The hospital kept it maintained even though it wasn't in use, planning to renovate it eventually. Most janitors refused to work up there alone, but David needed the extra pay, and he didn't believe in ghosts. It was a Thursday night around 2 a.m. when David took the elevator to the fourth floor. The doors opened to reveal a long hallway, dimly lit by emergency lights. The smell of disinfectant couldn't quite cover the underlying odor of decay and abandonment. He wheeled his cart out and began his work, mopping the floors and wiping down the nurses' station. He had been working for about 20 minutes when he heard it, a door opening somewhere down the hall, the sound of hinges creaking, then a soft thud as it closed. David stopped mopping and looked up. The hallway was lined with patient rooms, their doors all closed. At least, they had been closed. Now, one door stood open, room 413. David felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced himself to stay calm. Old buildings settle, doors can swing open on their own. He walked toward the room, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. As he got closer, he could see into the room. It was bare, except for an old hospital bed, stripped of its mattress, and a small table. He reached the doorway and peered inside. Empty, nothing unusual. He grabbed the door to close it, and that's when he heard the whisper. It came from inside the room, a voice so faint he almost missed it. "Help me." David's hand froze on the door handle. He stared into the empty room, his rational mind warring with the primal fear rising in his gut. "Hello?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Help me," the voice repeated, clearer now. It was coming from the corner of the room, near the window, a woman's voice, desperate and afraid. David stepped into the room, against every instinct screaming at him to run. He walked toward the corner, his eyes scanning for any sign of a speaker, a phone, anything that could explain this. As he got closer, the air grew cold. His breath came out in visible puffs. Then he saw her, or rather, he saw through her, a translucent figure of a woman in a hospital gown, sitting on the floor in the corner, her knees drawn up to her chest. She was rocking back and forth, her long hair covering her face. She looked up at him, and David could see her eyes, empty, hollow, filled with a sadness so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. "Help me," she said again, reaching out toward him with a pale, ghostly hand. David stumbled backwards, his heart hammering in his chest. He turned and ran, leaving his cart, his supplies, everything. He didn't stop running until he reached the elevator.
He slammed his hand against the button repeatedly, looking back over his shoulder, expecting to see her following him. The elevator arrived, and he jumped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the doors began to close, he looked up one last time. The woman was standing at the end of the hallway, watching him, just standing there, her arms at her sides, her expression unreadable. The doors closed. David reported what he saw to his supervisor, who laughed it off. But when David refused to go back to the 4th floor, they didn't push him. They knew the stories. They knew that over a dozen janitors had reported similar experiences on that floor. A woman in a hospital gown, always in room 413, always asking for help. David did some research and discovered that in 1987, a patient named Rebecca Martin had taken her own life in room 413. She had been asking for help for weeks, telling the staff that someone was trying to hurt her. No one believed her. They thought it was her mental illness talking. 3 days later, she was found dead. David never worked in a hospital again. He couldn't shake the image of those hollow eyes, the desperate plea for help that came 30 years too late. Story 4: The Office Building Encounter. Jennifer worked the night shift at a high-rise office building in Seattle. It was a cushy job as far as janitorial work went. Clean offices, modern building, good pay. The tenants were mostly tech companies and law firms, the kind of people who left their offices relatively tidy. Jennifer had been working there for about 6 months when she started noticing something odd. On the 17th floor, in the offices of a software company called Next Gen Solutions, she would find things moved around. Not dramatically, just small things. A chair pulled out from a desk, a pen lying on the floor when she was certain she'd placed it on the desk the night before. Papers were scattered when they'd been in a neat pile. She assumed the employees were coming in early or staying late, even though she never saw anyone. Then, one night in November, everything changed. Jennifer was vacuuming the 17th floor around 3 a.m. when she noticed something odd. One of the offices at the far end of the floor had its light on. She could see the glow under the door. This was strange because she always turned the lights off as she finished each section. She turned off the vacuum and walked toward the office. As she got closer, she could hear something, the clicking of a keyboard. Someone was typing, fast, urgent, like they were racing against a deadline. Jennifer knocked on the door. "Hello, I'm sorry, but I need to clean in here. I didn't know anyone was working late." The typing stopped. Silence. Then the light under the door went out. Jennifer felt a knot form in her stomach. She slowly opened the door and turned on the light. The office was empty. The computer on the desk was off, not sleeping, but completely powered down. She walked over to it and touched the monitor. It was cold. It hadn't been used in hours. But on the desk, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There was a document, freshly printed, sitting in the printer tray. She picked it up and read it. It was a letter dated November 15th, 1993, over 20 years ago. It was addressed to the CEO of Next Gen Solutions, and it was a suicide note. The letter was from an employee named Thomas Chen, who wrote about the unbearable pressure, the impossible deadlines, and the feeling that his work was consuming his entire life. He wrote about how he couldn't take it anymore, how he'd decided to end it all in his office, where he'd spent so many miserable nights working alone. Jennifer's hands trembled as she held the letter. She knew she should leave, should report this to her supervisor, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Then she heard it again, the sound of typing starting up from the computer that was still powered off. She dropped the letter and ran. She didn't stop running until she reached the elevator. As she waited for it to arrive, she looked back down the hallway. The light in the office was on again, and she could see a silhouette through the frosted glass door. A man sitting at the desk, typing away at a computer that shouldn't be working. The elevator arrived, and Jennifer jumped inside. She reported what happened to building management the next day. They were dismissive until she mentioned the name Thomas Chen. The manager's face went pale. He confirmed that Thomas Chen had been an employee at Next Gen Solutions and that he had indeed taken his final act in that very office in 2003. The company had tried to keep it quiet. Jennifer transferred to a different building the following week. She heard later that they couldn't keep janitors on the 17th floor. They all reported the same thing, the sound of typing at night, lights turning on by themselves, and that same letter appearing in the printer over and over again. Thomas Chen was still working, even in death, trapped in an endless cycle of the misery that had driven him to his final decision.
Our final story comes from Robert, who worked as a janitor at a high school in Maine. Robert was a former Navy veteran, a man who didn't scare easily. He'd seen combat, survived situations that would break most people. A night shift at a high school seemed like easy money. The school had an Olympic-sized swimming pool in the athletics wing. Robert's job included cleaning the pool area every Friday night, mopping the floors, cleaning the locker rooms, and checking the chemical levels in the pool. It was usually his last task of the night. One Friday in January, Robert was finishing up around 1 a.m. The pool area was always eerie at night. The water was still, reflecting the dim overhead lights, and the slightest sound echoed off the tile walls. Robert had just finished mopping the deck when he heard it. A splash. He turned toward the pool. The water was rippling, as if something had just disturbed it. He walked to the edge and looked in. Nothing. The pool was empty, the water settling back to stillness. He shrugged it off and went back to his cart. That's when he heard it again. Another splash, this time bigger. He spun around and saw the ripples spreading from the deep end of the pool. His heart rate picked up. Something was very wrong. Robert walked to the deep end and peered into the water. It was at least 12 feet deep, and in the dim light he could barely see the bottom. He was about to turn away when he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. There was someone at the bottom of the pool. A boy, maybe 16 or 17 years old, wearing swim trunks. He was just lying there, face down, completely motionless. Robert didn't hesitate. His military training kicked in. He threw off his shoes and dove into the water, swimming down to the bottom. He grabbed the boy and kicked off the bottom, pulling him up toward the surface. But something was wrong. The boy was heavy, impossibly heavy, like he weighed 500 pounds, and cold, so cold it burned Robert's hands. He broke the surface, gasping for air, and pulled the boy to the edge of the pool. He dragged him onto the deck and rolled him over to start CPR. That's when he saw the boy's face, and Robert's blood turned to ice.
The boy's eyes were open, but they were completely white. No pupils, no iris, just milky white. His skin was gray and waterlogged, as if he'd been submerged for weeks. And he was smiling, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across his face. Then the boy spoke, water gurgling from his mouth. "Thank you for joining me for a swim, Robert." Robert scrambled backwards, his military composure completely shattered. The boy sat up, water pouring from his mouth and nose, and began to stand. Robert tried to run, but his legs wouldn't work. He was frozen, watching in horror as the boy walked toward him, leaving wet footprints on the deck. "Don't you want to swim with me?" the boy asked, tilting his head at an unnatural angle. "It's so nice down there, so peaceful, no noise, no pain, just silence." The boy reached out with a waterlogged hand, and Robert finally found his voice. He screamed, a primal sound of pure terror. The sound seemed to break whatever hold the apparition had on him. He scrambled to his feet and ran, slipping on the wet floor, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. He made it to the door and looked back. The pool deck was empty. No boy, no wet footprints, just the still water of the pool, reflecting the lights above. Robert quit that night. He never went back for his final paycheck. He couldn't. But he did do some research. He discovered that 15 years earlier, a student named Michael Brennan had drowned in that pool during swim practice. It was ruled an accident, but there were whispers that it might have been suicide. Michael had been severely bullied, and some students reported that he'd talked about wanting to escape, wanting peace and quiet. Robert still has nightmares about that white-eyed smile, about the cold touch of waterlogged skin, about that voice asking him to swim. He never goes near a pool anymore, can't even look at one without feeling that same paralyzing fear. These are the stories of 5 janitors who encountered things that can't be explained, things that lurk in the empty spaces we rarely think about. The next time you're in an office building, a school, or a hospital late at night, remember these stories. Remember that when everyone else goes home, when the lights dim and the hallways empty, there might be others who remain, others who never left. If you enjoyed these terrifying true stories, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Shadow's Stories for more encounters from the darkest corners of reality. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever worked a night shift? Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? I read every comment, and your story might be featured in a future video. Until next time, stay safe out there in the dark. This is Mr. Shadows, reminding you that some things are better left in the shadows, but we're going to shine a light on them anyway. Sweet dreams.